Judges chapters 10 to 12 today, and this covers a period of about 94 years and quite a few judges, one of whom I think is going to be a prime candidate for the biggest muppet we've seen in the Bible so far. We open with a chap from the land of Issachar named Tola, son of Puah, son of Dodo. Don't know why that amused me so much, but it did. They again sound like Star Wars characters. I wonder if that's where a lot of that stuff came from, but Star Wars, I mean, not the Old Testament. This chap, anyway, he rules for 23 years and nothing else is said about him, so I don't suppose he does very much. After that, anyway, we have a chap called Jer, like chair with a J, and he goes for another 22 years. Again, nothing more said about him. Just not clear if the Israelites are whinging in between or if this is fitting the pattern, but either way, we've covered nearly 50 years just between those two. After Jer, however, the Israelites are very definitely back to all their sinning. They're back to worshipping the random gods and all the rest of it. And for this, it says that God delivers them to the Ammonites and the Philistines. That's the first mention of the Philistines, which is interesting because that's one of the words you hear still these days. If someone doing something uncouth, you sometimes hear someone call them a Philistine. Philistine, going to go with Philistine. And yes, it's interesting how that, whoever they are, they're the only name that's actually made it forward into the modern age, as far as I'm aware. Anyway, so the Israelites were oppressed by the Ammonites and the Philistines for the next 18 years. The Israelites go whinging to God, saying, oh, we need to be rescued from this, please help us, and the rest of it. And God, sounding thoroughly bored of it, just says, I'm fed up of rescuing you, go to your fake gods and ask them to rescue you. The Israelites then decide, okay, we'll get rid of all the fake gods, get rid of all the idols and all the rest of it. Then go back to God, please help us, we've got rid of all the rest of it. And it's interesting because God then says he can bear their misery no longer, so he decides to help them. At this point, we are introduced to the next judge named Jephthah, Jephthah, something, Jephthah, sounds about right. And the Bible notes that Jephthah is an outcast, cast out by his family and his society because he's got many brothers, but his mother is different to theirs. His mother is a prostitute, so he seems to be some sort of cast out from the land of Gilead, not sure. Sounds like it's east of the Jordan anyway, and so arguably outside of the Promised Land, but it seems to be for the purposes of this story that's within the Promised Land anyway. There's an interesting part that illustrates nicely how the wording in the Bible can be quite complicated. And it says that Jephthah is cast out and then a bunch of scoundrels follow him. I initially read that as if you're walking down the street and you see a bunch of hooligans making noises at you and you're sort of quickening your step, looking over your shoulder and panic. But I think in the context, it means that they were following him as in he was their leader. So he became like a gang leader or something weird. Anyway, some time passes and the elders of Gilead then come to him and say, can you be our commander? Doesn't seem to be much explanation for that. 1 minute he's cast out, the next minute it's like, oh, you're a commander. I was guessing this gang he was leading was quite large or something maybe. And Jephthah, I'm going to call him Jeff because Jephthah is really difficult to say. So Jeff writes to the king of the Ammonites or sends them a message, basically appealing to them with a big long story about the history of the Israelites and how they've basically left people alone if they behave themselves and they're cool, and they're only having fights with people if they're horrible. The Ammonite king basically sends back a sort of, yeah, whatevs, and then there's going to be a scrap. At this point, it notes that the Spirit of the Lord descends on Jeff, and I think that's the second time we've seen this, because there was a bit back in Exodus or Leviticus where Moses was getting tired of carrying the burden alone. And it said that God put the Spirit of the Lord on some of the elders to spread the load. It wasn't clear if that actually did anything in particular or if that was known to them or anything like that. But this is what now happens to Jeff. He has the Spirit come upon him, whatever that means, whatever that looks like, don't know. But at this point, the most spectacular example of muppetry in the whole of the Bible thus far comes about in that Jeff says to God, I don't know if he's just not noticed that this spirit thing has come upon him and now suddenly he's going to be all magic. I guess in his head, clearly he's got to lead some sort of army against the Ammonites and the Philistines, and it's going to be dangerous. He's like, oh, I might not win this. So he goes to God and he says, if you let me win this, whatever comes through my front door to greet me, the first thing that comes through the front door to greet me when I come home, I will sacrifice that to you. Yeah, so, I mean, at best, it's going to be a cat, isn't it? But most likely it's going to be your wife or one of your children or something. And so what was Jeff thinking? That's just the weirdest pledge ever. Unsurprisingly, of course, he wins, and then he goes home, and then from his front door to greet him emerges his one and only daughter. As he tears his clothes and he's despairing, and it's just like, presumably despairing of what a muppet he is. But oddly, his daughter is agreeable to being sacrificed, very odd, but asks for 2 months so she can go off and see her friends and weep because she's never going to be married. From this, I guess we can deduce that she's a very young daughter he's decided to sacrifice to God. The daughter goes off anyway, does her thing, comes back at 2 months. There's no detail, fortunately, but it's clear that she is sacrificed. I guess is that the first example of human sacrifice? I know Abraham was told to sacrifice Isaac, but at the last second told, no, I'm just kidding, don't have to do it. But otherwise, being sacrificed to the God of the Israelites, I don't think there's been people chopped up, or I'm assuming that's what the sacrifice is. I mean, it certainly sounds there's some sort of ceremony to commemorate Jephthah's daughter in later years, so it sounds like she's dead. There is obviously a number of problems with that, but we'll finish the story and then we'll come back to that. Next up, the Israelites have a scrap with the Ephraimites, who there's a big wordy thing that before it, but it sounds like they were going to be friends and they weren't going to be friends, and now the Ephraimites attack them. And Jeff and his soldiers go and capture a ford at the entrance to the land of Ephraim, which is where the Ephraimites come from. And they do this very cunning test where they ask people when they're going into Ephraim, are you an Ephraimite? And if the person says no, they have a cunning test where they get them to say the word shibboleth. And the test is passed if you can say shibboleth, but if you say it as sibboleth without the sh, then you are killed. And it notes that 42,000 people are killed at Ephraim. I don't think all from this test, because you think someone would have figured out just, sh, not sir. Yeah, so Ephraimites not the brightest bunch in the box either. Bit of a theme going on here. And then it's noted that Jeff rules for 6 years in total, not very long for having done quite a bit of stuff, and then dies. It seems dies perfectly normally. There's 3 more judges that follow him, and so the whole story covers around about 94 years. So, elephant in the room. Not only, we can skip over the fact that Jeff's a muppet and offers to sacrifice his daughter, because there are muppets, and that's just, there are some really dumb people. But God lets him do it, and this is the first example of a human being, I think, the first example of a human being in sacrifice to God, and God seems pretty cool with it, and I don't know what to do with that. That's really weird. I read a little bit ahead, but it goes off into the story of Samson, which we're going to do next. So it's not like suddenly it turns out everything was fine. It's like, no, it's really not fine. I guess we'll just have to see how that sits in context, because obviously there's a question mark over whether any of this is literally true anyway. But even if it's not literally true, what do you do with God allowing a man to fool himself into sacrificing his innocent daughter, and God accepting human sacrifices? It's problematic. But yeah, so weird story. Well, so hopefully that will wrap itself up a little bit by the time we finish the Book of Judges. But next we're on to the story of Samson.